Good afternoon. Just wanted to call this meeting of PST, Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee to order. Before we get started, I'd like to do it as we do each and every time. We acknowledge the members that sit on the committee, starting with our veteran, Senator George Edwards, Senator Michael Jackson, and Senator Johnny Ray Sailing. Today, we'll hear from three respective state agencies. You have Department of Natural Resources, Maryland Transportation Authority, and the Department of Public Safety Administration and offices. At this time, we'll have Andrew Gray, our budget analysis, give the report off of DNR.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll now present the Department of Natural Resources, DNR's operating budget summary here. The fiscal 23 budget for Department of Natural Resources DNR increases $8.8 million or 2.8% to $328.3 million. This is modified a little bit by the supplemental budget that was introduced recently. In terms of the managing for results measures, first one talks about here the riparian forest buffers. So the goal is for 2,000 miles of riparian forest buffers by 2025. It looks like it's going to be difficult to attain that goal based on the current trajectory in terms of the cumulative miles restored in the Bay watershed since 1996. Less than 1,500 here, only a couple years to go. However, the Chapter 645 of 2021, the Tree Solutions Now Act of 2021, was passed, which would provide a boost to this and a couple of other metrics for the Department of Natural Resources related to trees. Therefore, stay tuned. Exhibit 2 reflects deer management permit statistics by county. So this is information. One of the ways that the agency is able to manage the deer population in Maryland is to provide for these deer management permits for various producers to then get the permit and then be able to have year-round hunting in order to kind of maintain a population that's manageable for their properties. In terms of the statistics here by county, what we're reflecting is that Allegheny County doesn't have a lot of tags overall, but had the highest percentage of utilization of those tags for deer management permits. Then you have a couple of counties with very high numbers, Garrett and then also Carroll County, in terms of the number of tags that were kind of eligible. And then, Garrett had quite a few high percentage actually utilized, and then Carroll County less so. Exhibit 3 reflects information about eel collection statistics at Conowingo West Eel Collection Facility. So basic idea here is a huge ramp up in the number of eels coming from the Sargasso Sea, which is impressive and excellent news for the Susquehanna River because those eels do carry mussels in their gills, the kind of mussel young. Therefore, that'll help to populate the Susquehanna River and provide for mussel growth there, which does a great job of filtering out a lot of the nutrients and sediment coming down the Susquehanna River. Just note here that their information does reflect an additional number of days of operation of the eel collection facility. Therefore, you would expect to potentially see more eels coming through, but that's certainly dwarfed by the number of eels that they're showing there. So it doesn't look like that additional days of operation really affects the numbers, really. In terms of the fiscal 22 proposed efficiency, there's increasing federal funds for the Natural Resources Police, but I'd really like to focus, and then also some funding in the Critical Area Commission, general funds for grants and also staffing levels. But I'd really like to focus on the Chesapeake and Coastal Service. This is the funding for the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund. It's around $10.7 million in general funds being provided. This is to reflect the really kind of difficulties due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and really the revenues coming in from the short-term rental vehicles. That was a steep drop-off in the revenues there. Therefore, the administration is bringing in general funds in order to be able to shore up the work of the 2010 Trust Fund in order to make sure that projects are not canceled. Supplemental budget number 1 brought in February 22nd, 2022, brought in additional funding, federal funding, what we usually kind of see as budget amendments to the Natural Resources Police. Exhibit 4 reflects the overview of the agency spending here. The 3 main components, or largest kind of components of DNR spending, is Maryland Park Service here, Chesapeake and Coastal Service, Natural Resources Police. Maryland Park Service, really, a lot of it's due to the overall kind of enhancements of funding for the Park Service, the salaries for positions and contractual FTEs, and there's also grant funding for the Revenue Equity Program and pilots programs there. Chesapeake and Coastal Service primarily reflects salaries, but also largely the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund, and Natural Resources Police primarily salaries. Exhibit 5 shows the proposed budget. In terms of the personnel expenses, a $2.7 million increase for employee and retiree health insurance, about $2 million for turnover adjustments. The idea the administration would be able to, or DNR hopefully will be able to fill more positions. Then you're also seeing a kind of one-time Forest Service funding allocation from the dedicated purpose account for electric vehicles that hasn't been allocated yet. In terms of some of the other components of the budget, the real highlight is the Maryland Park Service's overall increase in funding. Substantial increase in funding for the Maryland Park Service. New exhibits go up by almost $2 million, about $1.6 million for landscape restoration and master plan development, $1.4 million for contractual full-time equivalents is largely paid for from the transfer tax funding, $1.3 million for kind of general park operations, and then $1.1 million here for supplies and materials, and then other kind of categories noted as well. In terms of the other components of DNR's budget, there's the revenue, fishing and boating services mandate goes up by around $1.8 million. It was not budgeted last year due to the fiscal constraints. And then there's large decreases here, probably focus on the $10.7 million for the one-time deficiency for the Chesapeake Inland Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund. In terms of the natural resources policies, around $1.5 million for State Highway Administration restoration projects, and a $3.2 million decrease in this category for the State Lakes Protection and Restoration Fund, which $2.2 million was designated for dredging purposes. Then in terms of kind of routine operations, around $2.6 million contractual full-time equivalent increase across the agency. Moving now to the personnel data, you see there's a 0.5 position decrease between the two fiscal years. Long-term vacancy abolished. In terms of the contractual FTEs, discussed a little bit about the Forest Service has, or certainly the Forest Service has contractual FTEs for the Tree Solutions Now Act of 2021. Then we talked about the FTEs going to the Park Service. And then we also have FTEs going into land acquisition and planning, primarily to administer the substantial increase in transfer tax funding for the PAYGO programs, and then Office of the Secretary and Wildlife and Heritage Service as well, and a couple of others there. In terms of federal funding, the Department of Natural Resources reflected funding from a couple of different sources. The two sources are from the two tranches from the CARES Act. The first funding reflected here is funding that was going to the Natural Resources Police through the Maryland Department of Health. So it was around $21 million or so that kind of displaced the need for general funds. There's also funding that's come through the Department of Commerce through the CARES Act, which is reflected here in terms of addressing revenue loss, around $3 million allocated for direct payments to various entities, and then also $1 million to address kind of support for the seafood marketing and business, the industry as a whole. And then finally, in terms of funding that's been received, most recently on August 4th, 2021, there was funding that came through the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which provided for similar funding to this was the CARES funding noted previously, $3.4 million. Finally, in terms of looking forward, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding there does not have any explicit mentions of Department of Natural Resources funding there, but there are some potential aspects of funding that could come to DNR. DLS recommends talking about what the disbursements of the CARES Act and Consolidated Appropriations Act funding looks like, and the likelihood that it will receive that Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding as well. In terms of the second issue, moving on to the Maryland Park Service enhancements, we noticed a substantial increase in funding for the Maryland Park Service. Just a little bit of background here. In terms of the need, the Maryland State Park visitors and capacity closures, we've seen increases over the years. In terms of the visitors to the state parks, this is the fiscal year, substantial increases. And then the park capacity closures. So that's obviously where we don't, for whatever reason, parking lots are full, we just don't have enough staff. We had to close a particular park. We see a substantial spike in calendar 2020, although it does come down in 2021. So perhaps if this is, the trend is leveling off, and perhaps we'll have a more stable situation going forward. Exhibit 7 reflects the Maryland State Park capacity closures by individual parks. Largest kind of overall closures are in the Patapsco Valley Park, State Park, and that's in the central part of the state, and then lesser amounts for the other parks noted here. Kind of anchoring is sort of like you have Assateague on the eastern shore, Patapsco Valley in the center, and then Greenbrier in western Maryland, kind of experiencing some seriously water-related needs in terms of why the parks seem to be closing. Exhibit 8 reflects the Maryland Park Service funding and personnel. You're seeing on this blue line that really relatively very little change in terms of the overall personnel in the Maryland Park Service since 2009, fiscal 2009. General funds have decreased over the years. That was primarily due to the shift to the transfer tax funding for the Park Service. Just a little bit reflected in recent years. Special funds have increased, though, largely due to transfer tax revenue coming through the agency. So in terms of how this is looked at, in August 2021, the presiding officers commissioned the State Park Investment Commission to look at a lot of these issues. Legislation has been introduced, Senate Bill 541 and House Bill 727 of 2022, the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, in order to address a lot of the considerations that came up as part of that State Park Investment Commission's work. I'd like to focus here on just the 100 new permanent positions. This is a major component of the recommendations. That would be to have GNR by July 1, 2024, increase the full-time employees by that amount with various allocations to various needs. One of the key challenges, of course, is looking at all this is the sustainability of the funding needed in order to address the state parks needs and Maryland Park Service's needs overall, looking forward. A couple of possible solutions in terms of changing the transfer tax allocation, perhaps a carve out of the sales tax and outdoor recreational equipment, or return to general fund support. This is kind of needed in terms of the sustainability because we're also increasing the number of state parks. DNR recently noted that 3 new state parks are being added to its complement. Therefore, DLS recommends that DNR comment on the long-term funding strategy to address the Maryland Park Service's operating needs in light of these enhancements and the Great Maryland Outdoors Act, and to comment on the 3 new state parks proposed to be opened in fiscal 23. Third issue concerns Fair Hill Racetrack and special events area funding. So I kind of jumped over this as part of the overall funding for fiscal 2023. There is funding of $4.3 million in total for Fair Hill in terms of operating and maintenance support for it. So substantial amount of money has been already invested in it, $20 million project that was basically funded by the Natural Resources Development Fund that pushed other projects out. That state funding, in theory, is supposed to be matched by private funding from the Fair Hill Foundation. So about $10 million a piece. But as we've seen in recent budget bills, we're seeing a lot of operating needs going forward as well. So it's not just about the repayment of the original funding to create the Fair Hill Special Events area, but then also to provide for that operating support going forward. So a recent event was held there, the 5-star equestrian event in October 2021. It had a substantial number of visitors, around 21,000 visitors. And a certain amount of revenue was collected, although it doesn't look like any of that net funding has necessarily come back to the state yet in terms of repayment. The overall amount that still needs to be repaid is about $7.1 million. This may need to wait a couple of years because the Department of Natural Resources indicates that the Fair Hill special events and kind of really need to kind of get going in terms of making sure that they have a substantial base of interest coming forward to be able to kind of provide for any repayment. DLS recommends that DNR comment on what guarantee there is that they will actually get that $7.1 million repayment owed to the Natural Resources Development Fund. Issue 4 concerns the Chesapeake Atlantic Coastal Bay's 2010 Trust Fund allocation. As noted previously, substantial drop in revenues, primarily due to short-term rental vehicles not seeing the same sort of revenue expectations that we had. In terms of the changes that we've experienced as a result of, substantial reduction in terms of the program work, to around $46 million from the high of around $52 million. And then there's just a slight shift, though, for fiscal 23 in terms of what they're planning to do. You see a $1.3 million increase for the Tree Solutions Now Coordinator and Regional Foresters as part of the Tree Solutions Now Act. And then there's a slight modification around $1.3 million in order to kind of level fund it. In terms of the competitive grant program, goes down by around $300,000, and natural filters on public lands goes down by about $1 million. DLS recommends the addition of committee narrative to request the administration continue to provide information on kind of the overall Chesapeake Bay restorations data. This is a recommendation that was incorporated in the Chesapeake Bay overview. DLS also recommends that the budget bill language be incorporated to add funding restriction for the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund annual work and expenditure plans. And the recommended actions page reflects that $100,000 restriction for the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund annual work and expenditure plans, and that summary of Chesapeake Bay Restoration Spending Committee narrative. Unless there are any questions, that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Seeing no questions, I'd like to bring up the agency, and I would ask that Madam Secretary Jeannie Attaway-Riccio and her team.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. For the record, I'm Jeannie Hadaway-Riccio, Secretary of the Department, and with me today is Alan Fisher, our Deputy Secretary. I want to start by thanking the Department of Legislative Services and Mr. Gray for the analysis, and we appreciate the opportunity to respond to the findings and recommendations. So regarding recommendation number 1, DNR is committed to continuing to provide the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund annual work and expenditure plan each year. We believe that a funding restriction is unnecessary since we have kept that commitment every year. Regarding recommendation number 2, our administration will continue to provide the requested data as recommended. DLS also asked us to comment on the status of the CARES Act funding and the likelihood of receiving federal infrastructure funding. So to date, we have had over 1,000 entities receive payments under the initial round of the CARES Act funding, which totaled $3 million in direct assistance. We have a second round of CARES funding totaling $3.4 million, which will also be dispersed to the same eligible entities pending final approval from NOAA. The remaining $1 million was set aside for programs that will strengthen our markets in Maryland and make them more resilient. And DNR is awaiting NOAA's final approval to proceed with those plans. As Mr. Gray indicated, Maryland is poised to receive a significant increase in funding due to the infrastructure legislation, but it is still unclear exactly what the Department of Natural Resources may be eligible for. We will be working with the Governor's Infrastructure Subcabinet to consider those opportunities, and also we are actively monitoring a couple of areas related to natural resources management. That includes wildfire suppression, wildlife management, fish passage, adaptation, resiliency, and also habitat restoration. DLS also asked us to comment on the Maryland Park Service budget and the 3 new state parks to be opened in fiscal year 2023. So the governor's allowance includes nearly $75 million for Maryland Park Service, which is a 20-year high for us. And we look forward to working with the General Assembly to ensure sustainable funding for state park operations in the future. We do plan to formally open 3 state parks this year, and activities are also underway to expand our existing parks and create new state parks and regions throughout the state. We're constantly looking for those opportunities. As Mr. Gray mentioned, funds have been budgeted in FY23 to study the management and staffing of the Maryland Park Service and to devise a park system-wide plan and strategies. So we would appreciate the committee's support in retaining the funding for this and other important land conservation programs that are associated with parks and state lands. Finally, DLS asked us to comment on the Fair Hill Foundation's progress in the payback. So the Fair Hill Foundation has been unable to repay the full amount at one time. We have an existing MOU with them, so we have submitted a revised and restated MOU to the foundation that outlines a process for them to repay the outstanding payment and balance over time. And the Fair Hill Foundation is still reviewing that MOU. With that, we thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, you spoke about the 3 new parks the Park Service is receiving through the budget and enhancement. Could you talk about the location of the parks and how those are determined?
Yeah, so the 3 parks specifically that will open before the end of the year, we have 1 in Western Maryland and we have 2 on the Eastern Shore. As I mentioned, we're also working on opportunities throughout the state to expand our existing parks and create new parks. In terms of the process of how that happens, it can happen in a combination of different ways, but most often it begins with a landowner that is willing to sell their land to the state.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just one question. It talked about the level of vacancies, and I understand we're in a great resignation at this moment. It talked about the level of vacancies that have been over a year. I believe it's 43 or 44. Could you just speak to how many of those 43, 44 that may be over 2 years? Because I know that this was an issue last year, too.
Do you happen to know how many are over 2 years?
I don't believe any are over 2 years. but
Okay.
No problem, and if you get the information back to the
Yeah, we'll
committee,
get that information to you, and I would just point out in the meantime that, while Workday shows those pins as a vacancy, a lot of times those positions are in recruitment, and we may even have an offer out, but there's no way to distinguish that in Workday. So while it may look like a vacancy, it could be something that we're close to filling. But
Okay.
we'll get you a breakdown, Mr. Chairman.
Perfect. Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, you mentioned the 3 parks. You weren't overly specific, 2 on the Eastern Shore, 1 in Western Maryland. Can you be a little more specific? And are these actual purchases of land for new parks, or are any of these going to be placed in existing state forests, which is legal under the bill we're passing?
So I think I know the project that you are referencing, and that is not included in the 3. That is another opportunity that is in the pipeline. And I'd be happy to provide you with an update on that if you would like at a future time.
Oh, yeah, I'd like a little more specifics. 2 more questions if I can, or I want, well, 2. Parks and playground, under your jurisdiction?
Yes, the community parks and playgrounds.
Last year, we got $85 million, I think, $1 million to each county, and then some of the big boys got a couple more million. How's this year's money gonna be distributed?
Okay, so those are 2 separate programs. So community parks and playgrounds funding is funding that goes to municipalities for playgrounds, sports fields, amenities like that in local parks. Separately is the LPPI program, which included $85 million in last year's budget. Similarly, the governor included $85 million in this year's budget. A portion of that funding is pre-allocated for projects, and the remaining funding will be allocated. So as I testified in our capital budget hearing yesterday, we are working with the Department of Budget and Management to clarify some of the language to express that it's our intent to implement that program in a similar way that we have implemented it in the past.
So how much is gonna be available that isn't designated to some place now in the new budget?
So I believe off the top of my head, it's approximately 75 million of the 85. That is
Okay.
unallocated. And I should also add that that funding goes to counties. Last year, that program was set up the same way, very similar to program Open Space Local.
And I hate to bring this up here, but I'm gonna bring this up here.
Okay.
Because as far as I'm concerned, it's been going on too long. Are you meeting with officials from Garrett County today or tomorrow?
I am meeting with the Greater Cumberland Committee tomorrow at the PACE reception. I do not have a meeting with Garrett County on my schedule,
Well,
but I'm
they're-
happy to meet with
They're
Garrett
down-
County.
They're down here. Mr. Chairman, if I can. Swallow Falls Bridge. This is beginning to be a pain in the you-know-what. This should have been taken care of a year ago. Your people, according to my sources in Garrett County, keep going around the bush here. If something comes up, they add something to it. Now they're saying you close the bridge. This is on a county road. Close the bridge down, tear it down, which means you gotta shut the whole road down for a year or more, which is ridiculous. So I'm asking you if you run into them or give them a call. This has to be worked out soon. And I'm gonna be looking at your budget. And if we can't get it worked out in the next week or so, I'm gonna be looking through here to see what I can hold up until we get something done. This is absolutely out of line. Should have been done a year ago. They should be under construction, or it should have been completed by now. So I'm asking you to get with whoever your negotiators are, to sit down with the Garrett County Commissioners and Administrator and get this thing worked out in the next week or so.
Thank you, Senator. I would be happy to meet with the county and follow up with you on that. At this point, there are essentially 2 options before the county. They can either construct the bridge where the existing bridge is, or they construct the bridge in a new location. If they choose to construct the bridge in a new location, that is a wildland designated area. As you know, the Maryland General Assembly, when they passed legislation establishing wildlands, it takes an act of the legislature to authorize construction activities under that designation. So building the bridge in a new location would require a lot of additional environmental assessment and legislative action.
Well, I'm not sure that's being presented to the people in that manner. I mean, you're only talking about moving it about 50 feet. And again, to shut the whole road down for a year or more, this was one of my concerns with creating these wildlands. You know, what can you do, what you can't do? So we're talking 50 feet. There are some existing old piers there. You were there, you saw them. So again, I ask you to get with them and see what can be worked out as quick as possible.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to do that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Edwards. Senator Saling.
Thank you. And we see this past year or two now, I think it's been because of COVID, how more people are going visiting parks. People are going out. And I think it would be a benefit for DNR and for the park rangers and those that are out there to let other people know throughout the state the good parks that we have in the state of Maryland, the places that they can go visit. And I think, I don't know how we, because one thing I know that I don't see that we're doing is promoting that. And I think if we have better opportunities in the state of Maryland to tell people, we have great parks here. And we need to let them know from Garrett County all the way to the Eastern Shore. People need to go around and check out the great things we have here. And I think there's more than anything, I mean, I've gone out more than ever. And I think people here can say they've done the same thing, just to get out. But I think we really need to find how we can promote this and get people out to our parks and enjoy the state of Maryland. So I think it's something that we need to look into. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Senator, for that, and we wholeheartedly agree. Part of the mission of the Office of Outdoor Recreation will be to work with the Maryland Park System to help promote and establish Maryland for its world-class recreation opportunities, which includes visiting our state parks. So thank you for your support.
Yep. Madam Secretary, I think this is the moment where we thank you for your leadership, you and your team. Just in reference to what you all do, I think that Senator Saling hit it right on the nose in reference to how many of us were in our state parks, whether it was with our kids, our grandkids, and making sure, and I think that we all have a certain level of grace and appreciation for our parks, and I think that one of the bills that's coming does reflect that support too. Also, just if you could just keep us in the loop in reference to Senator Edwards' request, that would be very helpful. And Mr. Gray, I'd just like to say thank you for your detail and commitment in reference to what you did for the agency and making sure that we were knowledgeable and educated on the issues. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
I'm getting on a particular issue here. They do a great job. We're willing to accept more state purchases and parks and all that stuff, but we also need some cooperation from the state because this impacts that area more than any place else. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Message received, and we appreciate your support as well, Mr. Senator. Thank you.
You all have a blessed day. At this time, we're going to call up Mdta, Maryland Transportation Authority. I didn't see Secretary Ports. Okay, Secretary Ports, Director Pines, and their team. And we'll have the analysis by Ms. Kelly Norton.
Okay, Maryland Transportation Authority's operating budget increases $33.7 million to $499.5 million in fiscal 2023. The capital budget increases $25.9 million to $599.1 million. Mdta has a goal of collecting 80% of its tolls through Easy Pass. In fiscal 21, 92.7% of tolls were collected through Easy Pass. MFR data has that continued to grow. However, Mdta has noted that the fiscal 2021 Easy Pass collection percentage is higher than a typical year due to the pausing of notice of toll due mailings. in fiscal 2022, Easy Pass collection percentage is likely to be artificially decreased as the paused video tolls are collected and increased video toll collections occur as a result of MDTA's approved customer assistance plan. They are expecting fiscal 2023 Easy Pass collections to resume in a normal manner. COVID-19 has had an effect on toll traffic and toll revenues. The left axis should read traffic in millions. On page 6, Exhibit 2 shows the annual toll traffic and toll revenue. Total traffic revenue fell to $455.9 million in fiscal 2021 from $584.6 million in fiscal 20. 2021's revenues was impacted by a decrease in toll traffic as well as a delay in collecting certain toll transactions. As mentioned earlier, the operating budget is increasing $33.7 million in fiscal 2023. That is mostly due to the increase in debt service payments of $33.2 million. On page 9, Exhibit 4 shows the sources of funding for the operating and capital budgets. The primary source is toll revenues with $736.1 million, or 67%. We can see on page 10, Exhibit 5, 54% of the funding will go towards the capital program with $599.1 million. I'll now turn to revenues and debt affordability. As mentioned, toll revenues are the primary revenue source for the agency. The agency expects to collect $822.9 million in fiscal 22 and $736.1 million in fiscal 23. Exhibit 6 shows the bond sales and debt outstanding. Outstanding debt is expected to be $2.3 billion in fiscal 2023 and to stay below the $3 billion statutory limit into the foreseeable future at approximately $2.5 billion. Mdta is authorized to issue bonds without obtaining the consent of any unit or agency in the state, as long as the bonds outstanding do not exceed $3 billion at the end of any year. Mdta has additional financial standards. First, the rate covenant compliance ratio requires that the ratio of net revenues to the amount deposited into the maintenance and operating reserve account plus 120% of debt service be at least 1.0. The fiscal 23 rate covenant compliance ratio is projected to be 2.5. Second, the debt service coverage ratio, which is a ratio of net revenues to debt service, must be at least 2.0. It is projected to be 3.1 in fiscal 23. There is a decline in this ratio that will be discussed later in this presentation. The last financial standard is the maintaining of $350 million in unencumbered cash. The unencumbered cash is projected to be $544.5 million, or about 13 months of operating expenses in fiscal 23. Mdta also issues debt on behalf of other state agencies and projects, also called non-recourse debt. On page 14, Exhibit 7 shows the debt service and debt outstanding for the non-recourse debts. Debt service payments are $33.7 million in fiscal 23, and debt outstanding will be $302.3 million. With personnel data, Mbta eliminated 20 vacant toll collector positions due to the transition to all electronic toll or cashless tolling. On page 16, Exhibit 8 shows the pay-go allowance for the 2022 through 2027 Consolidated Transportation Program, or CTP. The Mdta CTP totals $2.8 billion with reduced capital spending for fiscal 24 through 27 due to the expected completion of the deck rehabilitation on the eastbound span of the Bay Bridge, the Nice-Middleton Bridge, and Phase 1 of I-95 Express Toll Lanes Northern Extension Project. On page 17, Exhibit 9 has the capital funding of major projects by Mdta facility. I-95 has the largest portion with 47%, or $240 million. Exhibit 10 shows the list of capital projects in the CTP. There is $599.1 million programmed for fiscal 23, The total cost is $5.7 billion, and the 6-year cost is $2.8 billion. The first issue is the Office of Legislative Audit's audit of Mdta. The audit had 2 findings, the most concerning being that Mdta did not determine the impact of electronic toll collection system issues on its customers and did not identify and correct certain related customer overbillings. OLA reported multiple instances of overbilling at toll facilities due to problems with tolling equipment. In total, there was $155,481 in errors, with $67,000 in credits given to customers. Despite Mdta's low error rate with the tolling system, questions remain regarding accuracy and monitoring. DLS recommends adopting a committee narrative requesting that Mdta conduct an accuracy study of the tolling equipment at its tolling facilities and submit a report on Mdta's process to ensure significant tolling issues are swiftly identified and resolved in the future. The second issue is the ongoing backlog of toll transactions. Mdta paused the collection of video tolls from March of 2020 to October of 2020 as a pandemic relief action. Mdta has resumed mailing out notices of toll dues or NOTDs after this period ended. The agency has opted to not impose all of the tolls at once on customers and is using a metering strategy. In addition to video tolls being paused, there was a pause in the collection of Easy Pass tolls at the ICC in June of 2020. The posting of Easy Pass tolls on customers' accounts and the mailing of NOTDs has led to a dramatic increase of calls to the call center. On page 22, Exhibit 12 shows the monthly call volumes. Due to transitioning between the vendors, there's no data for March 2021 and April 2021. The calls volume peaked in November at 383,131 calls. Of course, the call volume increase has led to an equally dramatic increase in call wait time. Before the backlog, average wait time was 2.5 minutes. Wait time peaked in November with 163 minutes. As of January 2022, that has fallen to 65 minutes, and I believe it might be less now. The call center has dealt with hiring and retention issues, which has exacerbated the call wait time issue. Staffing at the call center has grown from 60 call agents to 163. Mdta should comment on the ongoing backlog, including an update on the hiring of call agents and whether it's on track to meet its timeline of processing the backlog by September of 2022. The final issue is the fiscal stress report that was requested in the 2021 session. The report was requested because it was concerned that Mdta's unencumbered cash might be within $5 million of the $350 million standard beginning in fiscal 23. Therefore, a financial forecast from 2021 through 2031 was requested. Exhibit 15 on page 25 shows that the unencumbered cash is now not projected to fall within $5 million of the standard until 2024. The forecast does show that the debt service coverage ratio will fall below Mdta's 2.0 ratio standard in fiscal 2030, prompting the need to raise toll rates by 33 cents. The fiscal stress report was written under the assumption that the Nice-Middleton Bridge would receive TIFIA funding, but the approval of the loan is tenuous. Mdta should comment on the status of the TIFIA loan application and how its financial forecast will be affected if the loan is not approved. The pandemic has had a negative impact on the overall financial forecast. The latest forecast estimates a $400 million decrease from fiscal 2020 through 29, which is lower than the October 2019 financial forecast. However, the pandemic and delayed toll collection has an unexpected positive impact on fiscal 22's toll revenue, which is expected to be $822.9 million, a $151.1 million increase from 2021 session's projections. While Mdta does not have information for video tolls collected, for the $458.6 million in Easy Pass tolls collected through January 31st, 2020, $74.5 million, or 16.2%, came from delayed toll collection. MDTA should comment on the possibility of a toll increase in fiscal 2030 and whether alterations to current capital plans could be made to avoid the financial stresses reflected in the forecast. In summation, DLS recommends adopting committee narrative for a tolling concerns report. It should include an accuracy study of the tolling equipment at its tolling facilities that covers a 1-week period and details the occurrences of overbilling of drivers and cause of said overbillings. The report should also include details on MDTA's process to ensure significant tolling issues are identified, stopped, and fixed. And for the pay-go recommended action, there is no action because it's non-budgeted. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. Secretary Ports.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jim Ports, Secretary for Maryland Department of Transportation. And I want to thank DLS analyst Kelly Norton for her work throughout this year. I'm also joined by William Pines, Acting Executive Director for Maryland Transportation Authority. And before turning over to Will to address the DLS analysis, I'd like to highlight several important events that occurred over the last year. Despite the continued challenges associated with COVID-19, the MDTA maintained its financial standards while funding multiple system preservation and expansion projects. The Mdta successfully replaced its only structurally deficient bridge in 2021. That was the 895 bridge project. It was not only delivered ahead of schedule, but was also under budget. This is similar to the westbound Bay Bridge deck overlay project, which we also finished a year early. Additionally, the I-895 bridge over the Patapsco Flats received the MDQI's Project of the Year award for replacement of the bridge over the Patapsco Flats. We're also really excited to report that we're on time and on budget for both the I-95 ETL, which express toll lanes, northbound extension, and the Nice Middleton Bridge projects. In addition to these great accomplishments, however, there were some challenges stemming from the COVID-19 toll backlog with numerous new video toll customers from the switch to all electronic tolling and the new toll collection system transition. To date, we made a lot of progress in these areas, and we're continuing to work with our customers to address their concerns. In that regard, I'm pleased to announce that the MDTA board recently approved a customer assistance plan that includes a civil penalty waiver grace period that waives all civil penalties for customers who pay their unpaid tolls by November 30th. I share more details on the customer assistance plan with the entire legislature earlier in the week, along with information that you can provide your constituents to help resolve some of the most common issues regarding toll building inquiries. The deferral of toll bills during the pandemic protected Marylanders from the hardship during one of the greatest health and economic emergencies of our lifetimes, but we realize paying off those bills now will be a challenge for many families. So the Customer Service Assistance Plan gives Marylanders more than 9 months to pay toll bills without having to worry about additional penalties or other consequences. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will now turn it over to Will Pines to provide additional information about Customer Assistance Plan and to address the DLS analysis.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman McCray and members of the subcommittee. As Jim mentioned, I'm Will Pines, Acting Executive Director of the Maryland Transportation Authority. And while I'm new to this position, I've been with the department for 18 years, working my way up the ranks from a bridge engineer at State Highway to several leadership roles at the MDTA over the last 10 years, including former chief engineer and chief operating officer. Just as 2020 was not an easy year for the transportation sector, 2021 was no exception as we continued to endure the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. With that being said, I'm pleased to report that the MDTA continued to weather through the financial challenges associated with the pandemic while also protecting the safety and welfare of our employees and customers. Transportation issues touch each of us, and I'm proud to be part of an agency that seeks to provide the best facilities and customer experience for traveling the public now and into the future. Now I'd like to thank Ms. Norton for her work and to address the areas of the DLS analysis where we were requested to comment. On page 23 of the analysis, DLS requests that we comment on the ongoing backlog including an update on the hiring of call agents and whether we're on track to meet the timeline of processing the backlog by summer of 2022. Like other businesses and agencies nationwide, the Mdta and call center vendor have been significantly impacted by staffing shortages, retention challenges, and COVID-19 related quarantining and absences. As shown in Exhibit 13 on page 23, call wait times are declining with increases in staffing. We now have over 200 call agents, which is up from 63 in November. However, we recognize that there is a lot more work to be done and to further reduce these call wait times. In response to the requests of the Mdta board, Governor Hogan, and Mdta customers, the Mdta board approved a customer assistance plan at the last board meeting that gives customers until November 30th to pay tolls without the worry of further consequences. It waives late fees for each paid toll and will reduce call center wait times. Secretary Port shared details of this program, as he mentioned, with all of the legislature, along with a recommended letter to help elected officials share with their constituents the most common tolling challenges. Lastly, the Mdta is well on its way to eliminating the backlog of transactions. The processing of backlog transactions is 99% complete for Easy Pass transactions and 91% complete posting of video toll and image toll transactions to customers' accounts. And the mailing of the notices of toll due are expected to be mailed by summer of 2022. Now, on page 24 of the analysis, DLS requests that we comment on the status of the TIFIA loan application. Mdta is also asked to comment on the possibility of a toll increase in fiscal year 2030, and whether alterations to the current capital plans could be made to avoid the financial stresses reflected in the forecast. Regarding the TIFIA loan application, I'm pleased to report that on February 16th, the Mdta was advised that the Nice-Middleton Bridge TIFIA loan allocation was recommended by US DOT Credit Council for approval, and the application is now awaiting the final approval by the DOT. Regarding the possibility of a future toll increase in fiscal 2030 and whether alterations to the current capital plans could be made to avoid financial stresses reflected in the forecast, the Mdta's responsibility to operate and maintain Maryland's toll facilities requires a strategic approach that avoids significant capital system preservation and expansion costs from clustering in a narrow timeline. As such, the Mdta deploys strategies such as asset lifecycle reviews, long-range needs analysis, and planned debt service cycles. The Mdta strategically issues debt in a managed cycles that entails periods of temporary increases to financially leverage and accomplish our major capital projects, followed by years of declining debt and fewer new money finances. Currently, reducing the Mdta capital budget would come at a great risk and cost, given that nearly three-quarters of the 6-year capital budget is under contract. Future possibilities for capital program reductions will depend on conditions and statewide priorities. For example, the Mdta will be concluding the NEPA Tier 1 study for the Bay Bridge in March, and while funding has not been identified, several counties have already requested funding prioritization to advance the NEPA Tier 2 study. The Mdta anticipates that several counties will include this request in their priority letters, which are due on April 1st. As noted in the Mdta's responses, a future toll rate increase in nearly a decade may be required to adhere to the agency's financial standards, and that irrespective of mitigation actions, future potential toll rate increases may be periodically necessary due to inflation and to support long-term population or economy-driven system expansions. Biannually, the MDTA Board adopts a 6-year financial forecast, which ensures that sufficient revenues are available to meet the agency's operating and capital budget needs while maintaining the agency's financial coverage ratio. The MDTA can leverage its stable, experienced leadership team to develop mitigation plans and strategies to alleviate the financial challenges. With that, we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and Mr. Pines for your responses. I have a couple of questions for you, Mr. Secretary. As you know, the areas of the state that I represent, and I know you'll see a priority list on April 1st, that we've had a continual conversations regarding the projects in our neck of the woods, namely the Thomas Johnson Bridge. I know that there's ongoing conversations for probably decades now regarding that particular piece of that project. So we'll continue to have those conversations, obviously. But there's also, I know your office has also been contacted regarding already this year, a couple of tragedies have occurred on that bridge where some citizens have leapt from the bridge. So we've had 2 suicides so far this year already. We're just looking to kind of have some conversations about how we can raise awareness regarding that matter, and if there's any mitigating steps we can take to kind of deter folks from doing that. But also, I think, an awareness campaign, let's kind of put our heads together, whether we're talking public school system or some coupling with the Maryland Department of Transportation's dynamic communications processes you already have out there. This is obviously very troubling for any and everyone involved in these circumstances, and that's in addition to the makeup or the structure of that particular facility down there. So certainly we'll want to speak to you in that regard. Secondly, Mr. Pines, you talked about temporary toll increases. So is there an natural assessment phase that you all go through? So if tolls were to be raised, and you mentioned that those tolls may be raised temporarily, so is there an assessment that occurs periodically on the rate for the tolls? Are we trying to make up for the last 2 years of COVID?
So I apologize if I missed something there that I may have implied. We don't have any temporary planned toll increases. The report noted that our projections were that there potentially could be a toll increase in 2030 based on our current projections and forecasts. And we regularly revisit all of our budgets and our revenue forecasts to evaluate potential impacts on our financial standards, but we currently do not anticipate any near-term toll increases.
Okay, thank you. Secretary reports, we will be in touch regarding that other matter.
Do you want me to address it?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, sure. So first of all, let's talk about Thomas Johnson Bridge. So I was in D.C., Craig, I think it was 2 days ago. They're all starting to run together, so forgive me. But they were talking about some of the IIJA funds, as well as they have a new bridge program. Now, more than likely, that's not enough money to handle the Thomas Johnson Bridge. As a matter of fact, I've had conversations with Congressman Steny Hoyer on that issue. And yesterday, while at AASHTO at that meeting in D.C., they had mentioned that there may be a new, let's call it major bridge program that may come out of IIJA that hasn't been completed yet. They're in talks about it. And they were asking for volunteers to be on the committee for that, and we quickly volunteered for that. As a matter of fact, the reason we volunteered very quickly with the staff of AASHTO was for the Thomas Johnson Bridge, okay? And we were hoping that Steny Hoyer could help us along that route to get funding for that. And so that may be an opportunity that we have in the future. As I mentioned, the current IIJ funds and the bridge money would not be even close to enough money. Although Congressman Hoyer did say he'd be more than happy to take all the money, and then he jokingly said he'll take half of it. He did say he would look for other ways to help fund that bridge. It's my understanding that members of our congressional delegation may have an announcement on this funding that may be a potential for bridges like this. And so we're gonna keep our eye on that for that purpose. So hopefully Congress will approve it and appropriate it for that purpose. And then, of course, if they do, we will build it. Okay? Now, to address your other question or concern about the suicides, there's a couple things that occur. One of the things that most large bridges or places that have large bridges recognizes is that it's a delicate balance between announcing and talking about suicides on the bridge and not talking about it. And the reason I say that is because even the Golden Gate Bridge, when I talk to people in California about this, one of the things they do is they do not talk about how many or what number they're on, because, and I hate to say it this way, but you know, if they're up to 1,000, and they get a lot of them, they're up to let's say 999.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to be the 1,000th person, okay? And so there's a delicate balance between that, and we don't want to encourage people, obviously,
Understood.
to utilize these facilities. So they got to be very careful. And also in talking with a lot of emergency managers, and I'll quote one, you know, he said, somebody asked a question about putting nets along the bridge, and this emergency manager said, they don't do any good. And I said, oh, why is that? And he said, because they jump from the bridge, they get in the net, and then they jump from the net. And so I think that trying to solve it through transportation is a little difficult at best, and that if we really want to address it, and we do, along with you, we really need to address it through the health department, and you know, through mental health. And that's really where we need to focus, because people who are determined to commit suicide are more than likely going to be successful if they really, really want to do it. And that's part of the problem. Now, we do go out of our way that when we see a vehicle pulled over and abandoned, our police officers get out there immediately. We have call boxes so that we can assist people, and we get people from the health department to assist. But our officers get out there immediately to try and persuade the person. And these are police officers that are trained in this. Well, as a matter of fact, what am I talking to you about? You probably have some
Secretary
of this training.
Ports, he's in
I'm
public
sitting there
safety,
thinking,
so you
why
wanted
am
to
I
start
telling
to wrap
him? He
up
already
so we
knows
can
this
get to
stuff,
the
right?
rest of the questions.
But yeah, so,
Look, we'll talk offline.
yeah, but we
I
can
think-
talk
I
further,
think it has
yeah.
to be a holistic approach. I
Sure.
think we all need to join in, so.
sure, absolutely, we agree.
Thank you.
Chairman, I'll do, that's my time.
Any more, Senator Jackson?
No good.
Senator Salem?
Thank you, Secretary, and all the information. As you know, in my area and a lot of locations, because what my question goes right into locations. In certain locations, you have areas where if anybody goes south, they have to pay a toll. They have to, wherever they go in their area, when they go south, they pay a toll. In a lot of areas, at times, maybe they go north, they go maybe JFK, but it's a problem in my area because of what has happened recently. As you stated, we've had people call me up, and we'll call my office 15, 20 people a day. And the problem was, you know, they were getting fees and fines, and we've tried to do as much as we can. We did use the report that you give us, and I want to thank you for that. But it hasn't helped it out altogether. There's still some problems there. And like, for instance, there's people that have paid the fines, and they're still getting calls, and they're still getting letters. And we're still pushing them, trying to get them, tell them, this is the phone number you need to call, they'll help you out. We're doing all that we can. And so, you know, again, where I am, where people live in my area, if they go south, they're gonna go through the Key Bridge, or gonna go through the tunnel. And that's just a matter of fact. So we're getting still a lot of calls. And I know there has been some confusion because I know there was a pause, there was a time that, people weren't getting any pay, and I was one of them. And then all of a sudden, I got like 1, 2, or 3, and I called, and I was able to at least to call to the right people, and I just did the right thing, and I think everybody's trying to do the same thing. How can we make sure that this never happens again? Because I know there's other senators are going through the same thing again, and I know you've heard this. So how can we try to prevent something like this? We're not getting averaging 15 to 20 calls a day, and it's a very serious problem.
Okay, I'll start.
You
I'll
start, okay.
So let's look at why we're here, because you asked how to prevent it, right? So obviously, we were faced with a 100-year pandemic. And keep in mind that we did have a plan to go to all electronic tolling, and that plan went out to 2027. Okay, so we actually absolutely had a plan to get there. However, when COVID hit, and you might recall, the governor had to immediately make some recommendations. I think it was March 17th. And so when that occurred, because it was thought that you could transmit the disease by touching or even transferring money, we immediately had to get our toll collectors out of the toll booths for their protection, obviously, and for the traveling public's protection so we wouldn't spread the disease. And what that immediately did was made everybody that was normally a cash customer a video customer. Now, our video toll was $6. Our cash rate was $4. So to help accomplish that, we waived all the video toll rates and made them all cash rates. Now, we had to immediately, at the flick of a switch, go to all electronic tolling, but we could not immediately, at the flick of a switch, change all of our software projects, okay? It's impossible. Nobody was ready for it. We didn't have any warning. It's not like a hurricane's coming in, you got 4 or 5 days to prepare. It didn't happen. So we immediately had a significant increase in video tolls. Now, video tolls take us a lot longer to get through because we have to go to the MVA, whether it's in-state or out-of-state, and find out who owns it. So that, and then the request from many legislators, comptroller, the governor, to have car dealerships and mortgage companies and rental facilities halt some of the payments for people because they were losing their jobs or getting reduced hours. We also paused some tolls. We also recognized there were a lot of people who were on the commuter plan that were no longer commuting. And so we had to quickly aid those folks too. So it was a lot of transitions that were happening immediately. Now, on top of that, we were literally in the middle of transitioning from a company that we had, a vendor that we had for 15 years to a new company. And all that software had to change. So COVID struck, which started the backlog immediately. We're in a transition between 2 vendors, and that transition also had transition time from one software project to another, which increased the backlog. And so, I mean, how do we stop it? One, don't have COVID, right? That would help. And then I think we would have had a much better, smoother transition had that backlog not occurred. Because keep in mind, when the firm that won the bid on this project, it was for cash tolls. There were no longer cash tolls. So they too did not expect to have to ramp up for that backlog that was caused directly by COVID. And so that's why we're here. And then we had to pause some of the tolls like the ICC for Easy Pass, because with Easy Pass, again, because of the transition shifting from one vendor to the other, with Easy Pass, with the ICC only, because if you go through a legacy system, that's one trip. You go through the harbor tunnel, the bridge, that's one trip. That's easy. But with the ICC, they have to bundle your transactions together, because you're not just going through one gantry. You could go for 1, you could go through 3, you could go through 7, you go through 15. And so it's sort of like your credit card. They don't send a bill out every time you use your credit card. They bundle your credit card transactions together at the end of the month. Well, we do a similar process. We bundle those transactions for each trip, which is a day, and then that bundling took time in that transition from one vendor to the other. And that was part of it too. So for all those reasons, that's why we're in a backlog situation. There's a few others, like we had the blackout period, and crap, I probably missed one here or there. So there were plenty of reasons for it, but we were always trying to do the right thing for the customer and give them the opportunity to pay, give them extra time to pay, and that's what you're seeing with the customer assistance plan.
And I understand most of that. My problem still was, there were people just trying to pay it, but the problem was the fines. Some of the fines were ridiculous. They were thousands of dollars, and they weren't getting it. And also, there was another problem, and it wasn't your problem. The problem was the mail.
Oh,
People
I
weren't
did
getting
miss
their
that
mail. So last week, I just got a New Year's Eve card from an old senator, Senator Peters. And I just got it this week. And that was a major problem.
I'm glad you
So,
brought that up.
Yeah, because I think in that sense, there should be a way where we can have some forgiveness or something to work that out.
We do.
Because people, and well, that's good, we need
We
to.
do.
Because there was a lot of people that were calling
So-
about that also, and that was a problem.
I'm glad you brought that up, Senator, because that I told you I probably forgot one in there somewhere, but yeah, that's one I
not
definitely forgot. And that was one we didn't anticipate, obviously.
No.
And because they were having problems with COVID too. They didn't have people to deliver the mail, and so they were late. I can assure you that one, you do not get a civil penalty unless you do not pay the tolls, okay? So you have a certain amount of time to pay the tolls. It's like your credit card. If you don't pay within a certain time, then you get the interest rate or the penalty in this case, right? So it's not that they would have a civil penalty right away. They don't. They have time to pay that toll first. Now, two, when you mentioned the U.S. Postal Office, we did have problems with that. We recognize that we have problems with that. Anyone that called and told us that they received a letter after the date, or, I mean, pretty much any time it was close, we waived the civil penalties every single time. Again, we understood, but we don't know who's getting their mail late and who's not. It's impossible for us to know. All I know is we never argued with the customer. We never did an investigation to see if they were telling the truth. We weren't worried about that. If they said they received it late, we believed them and we gave them the waiver.
Okay.
Yeah, for context, since April of 2021, we've given 175,000 waivers of civil penalties. So we have a pretty strong track record that if a customer reaches out to us, and one of the great things about the customer assistance plan is they'll be able to do that a lot more easily. But when they reach out to us, we work with every customer case by case. If the circumstances show that they're entitled to a waiver, we absolutely, like Jim said, do that. If they paid and they should get a refund based on their specific circumstances, we work with them to do that as well. And so we do believe in good customer service and treating our customers fairly.
And that's important. I mean, again, we've gotten so many calls, and we just want to work together to make a difference and make it easier, make it a less burden for anybody. I don't care who they are. And if we could do that, it'll make a difference. So thank you very much.
And that's why we sent that information out to you, Senator. I think it's unprecedented.
Yeah.
Precedented what we did. Me as a former legislator, I know what you guys go through. And so I was trying to, I'm a recovering legislator, by the way, but I was trying to think of how to be helpful to members of the legislature, and that's why we sent all that information out, to assist you and so that we can work together. And if you see anything other than what we sent out that we need to address, feel free to give us a call, and we'll be more than happy to amend it somehow and send it back out.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thank you.
couple questions. What day did the civil penalties start? I know you obviously have the customer service initiative plan that you all have put forward, so we know November 30th is the end date, but what day did that start?
So,
24th,
it was
right?
February 24th,
February
the actual date of the board approval.
Yeah, we can't take an action, according to our trust agreement, until the board approves it. It's sort of like your bills. They have an effective date.
And how many people paid the civil penalty? I know you talked about 175,000 waivers, but how many account holders actually paid prior to February 24th during that time of the blackout?
I don't have that number. We've gotten some requests for more detailed numbers. What I do have is the total civil penalties that were paid from March of 2020 till January of 2022 was $44 million. Now, that is including the universe of all types of civil penalties. We have large trucking companies that have large fleets. We have out of state, that's central collections units, court liability settlements, all of that. That's the full kit and caboodle, if you will, of what we're discussing.
And some of that could be prior to COVID also.
That's correct. It's from all historical
Yeah,
civil
it's
penalty
from,
debt.
yeah.
So I just want to acknowledge that you were able to give us the number of folks that were waived, 175,000, but you weren't able to give in reference to prior to February 24th. But it sounds like you're going to get us the information for how many account holders that was during that blackout to February 24th is definitely of the committee's
Well-
interest.
Well, the other side of that, Senator, is that a lot of times the civil penalties that had to be paid are people that go to court, and a judge actually rules that they should pay the penalty. And so that's not, a lot of that stuff is not what we track. I mean, we're tracking stuff from the customer service center, obviously. But again, these could be very old transactions. They have up to 2 years before Mva is their vehicle is tagged. And so many of these could be court cases where a judge actually ruled and said that they owed it. So, I mean, there's a
Secretary
lot of
Ports, I just want to
circumstances.
acknowledge that this request has been out for a couple of days at this point.
Oh,
And-
okay.
And obviously, you all are able to tell us that 175,000 has been waived.
Mm-hmm.
But for a 7-day request for such a serious issue, like this is one of the most prevalent issues, top 3 in the state of Maryland at this moment, with the easy passes. You heard from my colleague to my left in reference to the number of calls that he gets. You all know the number of emails that I'm sending to your office. So when we're requesting information, especially during a 90-day session, when you're taking 7-10 days to get responses back, that's very challenging and perplexing because this is a fast-moving process.
And if I could, like we discussed, that query, because our data in our database is based on transactions and revenue. When you get into the specific details of a customer, there's a lot of notes and things that are there. It's a lot harder query. We did meet with our database team. We are working on trying to get you a response to your request.
No problem. I understand it is hard because there's also been a certain amount of time where the information hasn't came in as of yet. So I do understand it is challenged because the information hasn't come in as of today at this moment. The next question that I got is, how many notifications to the folks? Because you acknowledge that when folks call, and obviously you know they have a tough time and a barrier getting through, but when they do call, that you all do credit or reimburse them for the civil penalty. So can you speak to what type of notification after February 24th, we're on March 3rd at this moment, what notification went out to those folks that may have paid that civil penalty that could have called or could call to get reimbursed?
So on the day of the actual board approval of the customer assistance plan, at that point, we issued a press release. It got widespread earned media that picked up exactly what the plan entailed. That's WBAL, many different news agencies picked it up. We have a banner on our website. You click on it, it explains the details. The Drive Easy MD website, when someone would go to pay a toll, it automatically brings up a screen that would show you that that plan is there. You click on that, it can take you to frequently asked questions. As Jim mentioned, he distributed to the entire legislative body the details of that plan. And that way it can be shared with all of your constituents. And of course, we've been working very hard through social media to send updates about that regularly.
Got it. The next one is the action that the board took on February 24th. I just want to be clear, did that have any impact on the trust agreement or no impact at all?
The board's action did not violate the trust agreement.
Keep in mind that the board has total control. This is a special fund. All funds that are received by the MDTA are generated from toll revenue. And so a violation, quite frankly, would be, for example, if there were a bill or a legislature would create a bill that would remove the tolls or the ability to get the tolls. Again, it's not state money, keep in mind. It is toll revenue from customers. And that would be a direct violation of the trust agreement. And more than likely, it would cause a downgrade in our bond rating, which would increase, interest rates for us to borrow money in the future. And it would probably also end up creating a toll increase much sooner.
So the board's action caused no harm in
Well,
reference to our trust
Well, let's be
agreement?
clear, the board's action caused no harm because we were waiving the civil penalties, not tolls. It's a significant difference. So what I was referring to just now.
No, I just was asking a
if it
simple
was-
question
if
about
it was-
whether it affected or impacted, and the answer would have been no, because
Because the board can take action, they have the right and they have the obligation and the legal obligation and the fiduciary obligation to determine how actions that they take impact us financially. And so,
the question's answered. I'm
Our
gonna keep on
goal-
going to a couple more questions.
well,
Senator-
our goal is
Senator
to
Ford.
collect tolls,
I got you.
not civil penalties. The reason we have civil
So to the
penalties
next
is to
question,
create
one of,
people.
one of the things that you talked about was you were at 60 agents. You're currently at 200 agents.
Mm-hmm.
Our constituents, Marylanders, still have challenges with getting through to MDTA.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just let us know how many do you envision agents answering at the call centers in order for us to get through not having a 75-minute wait?
Yeah, so what we are putting forward in the plan to the contractor is based on performance for wait times. We've asked them to make sure that they're under 5 minutes on the call time. So we're gonna have to see a little bit on the number of staff that actually takes to get to that kind of reduction in the wait times. Current projections are over 400 people. However, that will be sort of tailored to the actual performance of the wait times.
And keep in mind that when the original RFP came out, they did have it stacked up to handle the amount of calls had there been cash tolls, video tolls, a reduced amount of video tolls. But they were not prepared for a COVID situation in where we ended up with a backlog. That's what's caused a real large spike in the call center. And so we're addressing that from the short term, as Will Pines just mentioned, because we're adding agents. But as the backlog comes down, we would assume that would end up being reduced because they are going to be able to meet the obligation at a future date.
I got you. I don't want to make it a back and forth because I could ask a couple more questions in reference to that, but I will ask one last question. Obviously, trust has been broken in reference to how folks feel about government, and MDTA plays some form of a role in that when we talk about 75-minute waits and time. Folks receiving a number of bills all at one time. Folks receiving mailed bills with stacks of bills that's there. Help me understand, how does MDTA help to restore trust back in government, knowing that we've been dealing with this for the last several months?
I think,
You want to start with the metering of the tolls and all that stuff?
yeah, I mean, I think that we have done a lot, and we are trying to every day digest exactly what's happening case by case with customers and evaluate what the most significant issues are. So we've talked about before credit cards as an example. We implemented a card updater service that automatically went through and updated individuals who had expired credit cards, we were able to update 17,000 cards if their company participated, so that they were no longer receiving those higher tolls that they thought were erroneous, but it was as a result of their card being expired. Unfortunately, we still have 30,000 customers in our system that have expired cards today. And so in order to restore trust to those folks, some of them trying to reach us, we absolutely have to do better in our call center. That's what the customer assistance plan is a big part of it is designed to do, so that they can reach us. And then secondly, we got to take every customer and treat them fairly when they reach out to us. We've done a lot of actions to try to do that entirely. Like, for example, Ms. Norton mentioned the metering that we did with the backlog, where we sent 1 week of backlog and 1 week of current. That was specifically designed to try to not overburden customers too much, while recognizing that we do have to figure out a way to clear these tolls. As Jim mentioned, our board is not allowed by the trust to give free passage. And so we got to figure out a way, let's get this backlog behind us, get back to a sense of normalcy. But there's a lot more education to do. I mean, when Jim talked before about commuter plans, there are many customers who are teleworking now and do not understand why they get unused trip charges. They don't meet the discount plan requirements, and then they receive the unused trip charges on their statements, and they're confused. So we are going to do a lot to continue to help educate, communicate with our customers regularly through the call center, and we really do hope that, as normalcy returns through that and eliminating the backlog, we will earn their trust back.
Yep. Some of the questions that I'm going to take offline, but do have some form of an interest is, I always think about equity. A lot of times when we think about equity, we think about ethnicity, we think about gender, but there's a geographic equity. And I do feel, while my district isn't directly impacted, the 45th, I do think about the 6th, and I think about the 36th that have tolls right next to them, where their folks are feeling it a lot more than somebody in my jurisdiction would be feeling. So I would want to understand, how are you concentrating the effort, especially around those areas, because they're greater impacted than other folks across the state. The second one is in reference to people that may pay to have Easy Pass, so everything isn't about a credit card, but those folks that are unbanked, obviously when you all hit them 5 times, you've removed that money out of their system, and now they're not charged the $2, they're charged $4 or $6. How do we think about that piece of it? If they have $30, they have $40 down, and all of a sudden you hit them for $50, and now they have no money, they're now being charged this new toll rate. How do we think about that piece of it? And then the last one is, while we acknowledge the blackout, and this is happening in a lot of agencies. So, and I'm going to give example by the courts, and this will be my last comment. We know that the courts have been very slow at this moment, but there's going to come a point that they pick back up very quickly, and they're going to have to gear up for that. So you all were in this blackout, and you knew that this moment was coming upon us. And the question that I would ask offline, is how many board meetings had taken place during that time prior to February 24th before the action had been taken from that standpoint? Senator Saley.
Yes. Just real quick, when or is there a refund plan or information for a refund plan? Is there one there right now for those that did pay, between that time when you did give forgiveness for those?
As I mentioned, when it comes to refunds, one of the key aspects of the customer assistance plan is we are ramping up the call center so people can reach us. We do need them to talk to us about whether their specific case is meritorious of a refund. There are a lot of different circumstances. You have customers who have been at Central Collections Unit for years on a payment plan. There's customers who had a court settlement and so blanket refunds are enormously difficult for a lot of different reasons. We would need them to reach out to us to be able to discuss their circumstances.
I understand there's circumstances, and I understand some of them are very different, but some of those are not. That's the reason, the ones I'm talking about, that people like to reach back to you. that are just concerned because they got nailed one time because of, again, mail or something like that. So that's why I'm saying that.
And
Another thing is that, I think one of our administration, parts of our administration that I think was going through a tough time, and I think they used something which I think worked better, and I've seen it. The unemployment, which was a disaster for a period of time, but did get to the districts. So they got to our districts, and when they did that, they went directly from our districts right to them. And we were able to help in some way to make that difference, and it did work. They were waiting for 2 or 3 months to get something. We worked with them, and in 10 days, they were getting results. And it did make a major difference, and I seen that personally, and we got letters, and I didn't expect this. We got letters of thank you because we were working with them. So if there's something that we can do to say, okay, what can we do? We have this number, it's in my district, and I want to give you this information. Let's get and help them out. Here's their phone number. If we can do something like that, and if you have all these people that are now have their ears and they're prepared to work, let's work together through this, and let's make a difference. And let's lessen this blow, and then we can be in a place of, we're finally there. And I think if we can do something like that, we can just working together,
Yeah.
being a team, hey, I'm willing to do that.
There are a few things that we are doing. As you know, we do have the customer service centers that are in and around your district.
Yep.
We also expanded a lot with the MVA, Motor Vehicle Administration, kind of a one-stop shop. So we're actually getting ready to open up again another one in Essex. And so we are doing those kinds of things. And again, we're ramping up the customer call center. There were not bodies available for quite a while, especially going through COVID and obviously people getting sick. But what we were fortunate to do now is a lot of the people that we're getting ready to put into place, this other 200 to double our services, they were working in the healthcare industry. And now that that's come down, they got a trained force, healthcare trained, but a force that's used to doing customer call centers, and so we're grabbing them because their contract's getting ready to end, and we're like, well, we can train them to do our stuff, and then, so that's how we're doing it, okay? We're trying to pull out all the stops to get through this backlog. Again, COVID related, right? Once we get through this backlog, I think that we're gonna restore the trust and restore good customer service again, like we had prior. So I think we just got to get through this little blip, if you will, this uphill battle that we have. And of course, you are part of that because, again, we sent it out to every legislator so that you can help those constituents look for these common things. And if they see that their credit card is expired and they put in a new credit card, they're done. They don't have to call the call center. They don't have to wait in line. They don't have to do anything else with us because we helped you help them. And that's what, you're right. We need to work together and we'll do that.
I believe right now, looking at from January 22nd and seeing the 65-minute wait, I have 2 people in my office. They would call my office. We would get their information. We sent it right down to employment, and within time of that, the same thing with you. Having that extra person, that being there, and all those others, and have that contact, we can say, we can call this person right here, we know he's right there, and we can get that time in a timely fashion. That makes all the difference in the world for the customer service and anything. And I think if we can just do that.
We do it every day.
We go. So I appreciate that.
Do it every day.
Yeah.
Send it to us.
Yep, thank you, Mr.
Thank you, and thank you all for your patience and obviously the time that we spent in reference to this respective agency. Just want to start by, I think it's important on behalf of the entire committee, probably the entire Senate, that the actions that you all did take on the 24th, we're very thankful for that, and I think that it relieves a lot of stress off of a number of our officers, and I know it did a great justice for Mdta. Director Pines, I think that it's very important as you ascended to this position. I believe that this is all of our first time seeing you in person, so just wanted to say congratulations. But obviously, you get to see that this is the moment that leaders are born and made for because we're serving in this pandemic and it's a tough challenge from there. And just want to say look forward to continued partnership and just helping to make sure that the agency thrive. Thank you all again.
We'll be with you. Thank you.
Colleagues, this ends it for Maryland Maryland Transportation Authority. We're going to bring up our last agency colleagues, Department of Public Safety and Administration and officers. And before I go to Mr. Cash, I just want to remind the committee that we also have another meeting right after this, and then myself and Senator Edwards have another meeting right after that one, so. Mr. Cash, it's on you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you just mentioned, I'll be going over the budget for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, Administration, and Offices. Joining me on the cover page, there is a $170 million appropriation in fiscal 2023 for this agency, which is an increase of only $180,000 or 0.1%. Key observations that we'll be going over today are the contraband levels that are very high, the emergency medical contract audit, which revealed $1 million in potential recoveries, as well as high administrative vacancies in certain units within this agency. To summarize the units, there's the Office of the Secretary and the Office of the Deputy Secretary of Operations, and these hold a number of administrative units which operate across the department. This agency also includes two quasi-independent agencies, the Maryland Commission on Correctional Standards, as well as the Inmate Grievance Office. Moving right along to the performance evaluation, Exhibit 1 shows the number of offenders who were erroneously released from facilities. And in 2021, there were no erroneously released offenders from Division of Corrections or pretrial detention. In Exhibit 2, the Central Home Detention Unit falls under this budget, and so Exhibit 2 shows the population each month since January of 2020. There was that large increase related to the pandemic and the increase of eligibility for home detention, which quickly tapered off at the end of 2020, and then since January of 2021 has steadily been at a decline. In January of 2022, that population was at a similar level to prior to the pandemic. We are asking DPSCS, though, to address the high number of walk-offs, which they recorded from CHDU. 26 offenders, there were 29 offenders who walked off from home detention in 2021. So we're asking them to address why that might have happened and actions they're taking to prevent that in the future. Exhibit 3 addresses recidivism within the department, and quickly I'll switch over to an updated version of this, which shows the numbers normalized as they appear in the MFR. There was a mistake on that graph in the analysis, but releases as a whole have reduced their returns to incarceration within their first year, and the majority of that decrease was for expiration of sentence releases. Moving back to the analysis, there is, however, new recidivism data that we've received from the Joint Chairman's report. This recidivism data provides a better or a more comparable number to other states and to the past. The fiscal 2017 cohort was found to have a 37% recidivism rate, and the 2016 cohort was found to have a 37% recidivism rate as well. In fiscal 2018, that cohort had a slightly reduced 3-year recidivism rate, and that trend looks like it's continuing for the 2019 cohort as a result of COVID-19 limiting those who were being processed as returning to custody. The JRA was also seen to impact recidivism trends as the graduated sanctions and technical revocation caps limited the amount of those who were returned within their first few months of release. They're seeing that those who are recidivating are doing so later on than they previously were. Moving right along to the budget, as you might mention previously, this unit included the Maryland 911 Board or the Emergency Number Systems Board. This was moved to the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, so all of those numbers have been removed from this budget, and that'll be discussed elsewhere. Exhibit 4 breaks down the budget based on each unit. The Office of the Deputy Secretary of Operations is broken out in that side column, and Security Operations includes the K-9 Contraband Unit. The largest overall unit in administration is the Administrative Services Unit, which includes HR, personnel, and payroll, as well as a number of other administrative processes. The IT and Communications Division, actually, the IT and Communications Division is the largest, followed by Administrative Services. The overall budget change is driven by a few things. There's an inmate medical costs that were realigned from the Central Home Detention Unit to the Division of Pretrial Detention due to the change in the relative inmate population. There were new vehicle purchases in 2022 and in 2023 to refresh the aging fleet. There is as well an increase related to internal employee investigations and inmate grievances referred to the Office of Administrative Hearings. There are 3 management consultant studies as well that I'll point out in this budget, including $750,000 for Duval case management that was mentioned in the Division of Pretrial Detention budget, and $150,000 for planning the women's pre-release facility, which was mentioned in the Division of Corrections budget. There is also $250,000 for the facility master's confinement study, and that is required by statute to be done regularly in order to determine future bed space requirements for the state. In terms of personnel data, there are 7 transfers from the Division of Corrections to the Office of Administrative Services, including administrative and procurement officers. Budgeted turnover is reduced by 0.5% in fiscal 2023. And overall, if we look at current vacancies compared to the turnover expectancy, there would be about $14 million available to fill nearly 174 vacant positions in fiscal 2023. There's an issue with vacancies again in this division, as we've seen with the department as a whole. Administrative Services Unit has 30% vacancies and the most at 104 total. The IT Communications Division also has 26% vacancies, and they've been operating at that level for a few years, as well as General Administration. Capital Construction Facilities Maintenance has the highest vacancy rates at 65%, or 13 vacancies compared to 7 filled positions. And one of the issues we'll be going into in just a moment is the department's staffing for their project management units. The first issue that we'll talk about is contraband levels. These are seen to be very high in fiscal 2021. As you can see, there's been an exponential increase since 2019, 763% increase in 2 years. Since 2020 to 2021, it's a 229% increase. The Exhibit 7 shows just those that were found by the K-9 Contraband Unit, while Exhibit 8 shows all contraband items that were found, including those found through other means, and it breaks down the categories of contraband. Controlled dangerous substances made up 96% of all fines, and were by and large the majority of reasons majority of reasons they found contraband this year. There has been an increase in the number of contraband items related to Suboxone film, which is a highly divisible controlled dangerous substance that is more difficult to find. However, the increase in canines that the department is utilizing in their canine unit has improved their ability to find those items. But there is one project that DLS believes would be very important to tackling this issue, and that is the drone detection program. This is a major IT project that was funded initially in fiscal 2018, and in fiscal 2020 was upgraded to a full major IT project. There is an award that is set to be heard before the Board of Public Works on March 9th. However, this is still representing a delay from previous plans, which were meant to begin in fiscal 2021. One of the reasons why there have been delays in several major IT projects, and not just for the drone detection program, is the high number of vacancies in the IT division. And that is something that DLS recommends, we'll be making a recommendation on in just a moment. However, we are recommending DPSCS addresses specifically the increase in drug contraband fines and providing more information on those contraband interdiction efforts, specifically the drone detection program. Secondly, moving right on to those vacancies, In the past, there have been a number of multi-year delays on their major IT projects, including the computerized criminal history replacement, the Maryland Automated Fingerprint Information System replacement, a replacement for the operational system for MCE, as well as the electronic patient health record. All of these are important for the department, not just to improve their operations, but to meet legal requirements as well as audit requirements that have been found to be deficient in the past. These delays can also cause federal funds to lapse. An exception was made for the Mdta system, and that grant was extended, but for the computerized criminal history replacement, delays caused $2.3 million in federal funds to lapse and be replaced by general funds. While there are a lot of factors that influence the delays for major IT projects, and DLS is by no means putting all of the blame on low staffing, it is clear that if ITCD had improved staffing levels and lower vacancies, they would have more capacity to meet the needs of these projects, develop technical specifications, and implement and integrate the systems into their highly complex daily work. The Office of Legislative Audits found them to be out of compliance with safekeeping of personally identifiable information as well in their most recent audit, and more human capital would increase the ability of ITC to specialize and train employees in carrying out these complex projects. Not only is their IT unit suffering from high vacancies, but their Division of Capital Construction and Facilities Maintenance program also has high vacancies. As I mentioned earlier, 13 positions are vacant and only 7 are staffed for this division, and they are responsible for carrying out the large number of projects that will transform and improve the maintenance of DPSCS facilities. The capital improvement program is very large, and those projects have been delayed as well for many years. There's 9 projects planned. 3 received 2023 funding totaling $28 million. However, they're also administering 28 capital maintenance or facility system projects through operating funds or the DGS facility renewals funds, as well as the Access Maryland funds. There's also a substantial backlog of projects which are not being funded in fiscal 2023, estimated at $74 million, which continues to grow as the facilities age. There have been liabilities in the past related to maintenance and accessibility for those with disabilities. And so it's important that there is enough staffing to carry out the projects that will help the department become compliant in these areas. There's also security systems that are being delayed as they have reached the end of their useful life, and there are not adequate repairs available for those systems, and they require replacement but have still faced delays since 2019. Additionally, steam tunnel replacements at ECI have been delayed for several years, and electrical infrastructure upgrades in Jessup. Some of these delays were obviously related to the COVID-19 pandemic, but most of them also predate COVID-19. They were made worse by hiring becoming more difficult, as well as the cost of materials, in many cases doubling in real terms in a short amount of time. Many projects required value engineering, and the transition to DGS project management made that more difficult and increased delays further. DLS is recommending to address these issues to restrict $1.5 million in personnel general funds across the department so that they can be used to increase IT and capital construction positions in the department. These are critical positions, and the project delays need to be rectified. Moving on to the final issue for today is the medical audit for the emergency contract modification. To remind you all, beginning with the pandemic, there was a flat 33% increase made to the inmate medical care contract. And this lasted until July of 2020, when the Board of Public Works unanimously rejected that model. They directed the department to switch it to an audible reimbursement model, and the department did so, and Joint Chairman's report, budget bill language required the Office of the Inspector General within DPSCS to audit the expenses that were already processed in the time of the modification. The results indicate that approximately $1 million, or $944,000, are available to be recovered by the department. They were not supported by bills, and in some cases, they were double counting staffing hours totaling $370,000 as well, or for temporary staffing as well as full-time staffing. They also found several other discrepancies that totaled $250,000 related to items such as Medicaid N95 masks and other bonus payments. We're asking DPSCS to comment on the overpayments, the status of recovering them, and correcting any other discrepancies that OIG found. There are 4 recommended actions for this budget. The first I mentioned just previously, to restrict $1.5 million to be used for increasing staffing at the Information Technology and Communications Division and the Division of Capital Construction and Facility Maintenance. The second recommended action is the Justice Reinvestment Act report, which helps DLS in determining the cost avoidance associated with this program, with this policy reform. Recommended action number 3 is a report on recidivism, and that helps to track the progress of the department, as mentioned at the beginning of the performance evaluation. And finally, recommended action 4 is a report on contraband and efforts to reduce the amounts. There's appendices summarizing reports we submitted last year, as well as the audit that I mentioned for the IT and Communications Division, which is the finding number 1, referring to personally identifiable information. With that, I'll conclude the presentation and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Secretary Green, in this team.
Very good. Thank you, Chair McCray and members of the Senate PSTE Committee. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Robert Green. I'm the Secretary of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today at the table is Sasha Vasquez, our Acting Deputy Secretary of Administration. Also with us to answer your questions is Rachel Sestra, our Chief of Staff, Nigel Roberts, our Chief Financial Officer, Errol Eddings, our Executive Director of Intelligence and Investigative Division, and Angela Garino, our Executive Director of the Office of Data Development. We very much appreciate the thoughtful analysis of Mr. Cash and his continued hard work. And as always, we thank the staff that lend their experience and their work to every aspect of this report, as well as the men and women that do this job every day in very challenging times. We thank them. While our correctional officers provide the safety and security umbrella that allows many of these services to take place within our state correctional facilities, our non-custody administrative staff are as important in keeping our operation moving forward. The DLS analysis contains 3 issues as well as 4 recommended actions. Our written testimony provides very detailed responses to each of those 3 issues. I will answer any questions you may have on those, but immediately move to the recommended actions. Number 1, the department would respectfully disagree with recommended action 1, which would restrict the $1.5 million to be used solely to hire IT staff and capital construction staff. When I was appointed by Governor Hogan, I made it clear that one of the first things that I acknowledged was that we need to recruit and hire correctional officers. That was an immediate need. It was a focus of the Budget Committee, and it became one of our very, very top priorities in the department. This is not to say that we didn't continue to try to hire across every other discipline. We certainly did. But as I've said in the previous hearings, the COVID-19 pandemic and the hiring freeze, which was upon us, very much and significantly impacted our ability to recruit and hire in the administrative positions. Now that that hiring freeze has been lifted, effective November of last year, we've seen a significant reduction in the spread of COVID-19, and we have some significant salary enhancements on the horizon. And I fully expect and pledge that we will progress in filling these positions. We have 41 active job postings out right now. We concurred in a previous hearing with the recommended action of our Division of Pretrial Detention Services budget that proposed restricting some funds solely for the purposes of providing the substance use disorder treatment, because we readily recognize that this was a major issue and it had to be brought to completion, and it had existed for several years. I would respectfully ask the members of this committee, give me the opportunity. I will fill these positions. We will make progress in doing that. And I am committed to report to this committee on the basis that you determine our progress in doing so. Thus, the nature of my request to not accept that action. Recommended action 2. The second recommended action was for the department to submit a report, Justice Reinvestment Act. We concur with that recommended action. Third action, the department agrees in part with the third recommended action, which is to submit annual reporting of recidivism rates. However, we would respectfully disagree in part on the scope of the report, on the rationales outlined on page 6 and 7 of the department's written testimony. We've also proffered what the reporting requirement should perhaps look like, and that's underlined at the top of page 7 of the written testimony. And it's in comparison to the report we have already produced for you, which is an exceptional report. Recommended action number 4, the department concurs with the last recommended action, which would require the department to submit a report on trends and contraband. And with that, myself and my team remain available to you to answer any questions you may have.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Eugene. A couple of quick questions. One, regarding the, I do understand your contraband challenges. Speak to me about the other efforts in addition to the drone detection program. And then secondly, do you have I know that Senator Rosapap and myself and some others are involved in the public safety apprenticeship, but let's just keep in mind that that's not only just for uniformed personnel. It's also for any and everybody else, any and every other opportunities that you have. So anybody could be a part of these programs going forward, and to couple that with your community colleges and universities, internship programs and others. So that's it.
Thank you very much for that question, Senator, and your notion and of us on those apprenticeship programs, well taken. Thank you, and I'm sure we will follow up on that. So around the contraband, if I may, that increase should not at all be reviewed and viewed by this committee as solely an increase in contraband. I would share with this committee there was a deliberate effort, not just effort, but change in some areas of operation and how we are operating with the fusion of intel, information, and resources around targeted interventions. While COVID-19 did, I would say to some degree, funnel the focus of how contraband entered our facility via mail, that was the primary resource. To that end, we also doubled down on the detection methodology, and I would absolutely welcome this committee to come and visit us and let us show you what we put in place and what we're doing in a fusion concept to do that. I'd also note just around our contraband detection, our K9 unit, which is nationally recognized. In 2020, we had 26 staff in that unit with 32 certified dogs. In 21, we had 33 staff with 62 certified dogs. So that is not, when we think of K9 units, it is not a one-to-one comparison. We may have some operators with 3 dogs, which makes their shift 3 times more fruitful, if I may, because there are rest periods and things that need to take place. I'd really like to give you more of a detailed overview of what we're doing there, but would like to do that in a more one-on-one or group setting. But it was a deliberate effort to intercept. What we are dealing with the mail requires a very complex detection methodology. Drug-infused paper, buprenorphine, Suboxone is the #1 most contraband drug of choice in prisons in the United States. It is highly concealable within mail, and how it can be brought in small bundles with large quantities. It's very divisible, and it is being used to perpetuate drug habits and substance abuse, and it does make you high.
And I will say this, you know, understanding drug and addiction and the things that you're dealing with, I also understand workload. I understand that when you introduce new concepts that, you know, sometimes those numbers go up. And so I think what I would like to say, where, you know, like I may understand it, but communications. Just make sure you communicating with this committee. When you see certain numbers go up, that means that our enhanced efforts will cause the detection of these numbers. And so, for example, you know, my agency, we introduced a 24/7 domestic violence program where we had volunteers and a bunch of other folks. Those numbers went through the roof. The media got a hold of those numbers and said Prince George's County is, you know, on the rise for the wrong reasons for domestic violence. I said, no, we were on the rise because we had a 24/7 unit that was available to folks, and they had their confidence level rose. So communication is key. We'd like to work with you on that, so.
Very good. Thank you for that input, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. And seeing no further questions by the committee, Mr. Secretary, I just wanted to say, as usual, thank you all for your leadership. Mr. Cash, just thank you for your due diligence in reference to the agency report. Colleagues, this was the last agency report, so this does end the hearings for Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.